Anxiety is a big issue. So many people are dealing with anxiety, and I recently came across a study that said that 55% of young people feel moderately or extremely anxious. Just anxiety is something that so many people are dealing with. We saw in 2020, the number of people dealing with anxiety went up to 41%. American adults, 41% reported symptoms of anxiety. And so if you're struggling with anxiety, you're not the only one. You're not alone. There's nothing wrong with you. Anxiety is something that so many people are dealing with, and I have dealt with it for years. And oftentimes, when it comes to our faith communities, when it comes to Christians, teachings that we hear, a lot of things we hear that people think are biblical actually aren't. Maybe you have heard that if you are dealing with anxiety, it's because you just lack faith, that you don't trust Jesus enough, that you don't have enough faith, that you're not spiritually mature enough. That's not true. We don't see that in the Bible. Or perhaps you're going through the season of anxiety and people have told you to be praying more, to read your Bible more. Maybe there's sin in your life that you have unconfessed, and so that's why you're dealing with anxiety. Listen, that's not true. We don't see that in the Bible. So today I want to explore what the Bible actually says about overcoming anxiety and practical steps we can take. But before I share more, if you haven't already, I want to invite you to join our Discord community, the Resolution Movement Discord community. There you can connect with other people. We've got a prayer channel. We've got an overcoming anxiety channel in there. We've got links to counseling organizations, and there's over 500 people in that community. And each day we're seeing people encourage one another, support one another, share things with one another. And so many people are finding hope and support. So I want to invite you to join the Resolution Movement Discord community. resolutionmovement.org/join is the easiest way to find or to join that community. And then in that community, we're going to start going through the Overcoming Anxiety plan. It's a YouVersion Bible plan, 3 days. We're going to go through that this week. So join the community, go through it with other people, and it's going to be really helpful, I believe. But for me, anxiety is something that I began dealing with at a really young age. Growing up in a family where I had to be on alert because I didn't feel safe, where my dad was emotionally and physically abusive, where my mom didn't intervene. As a kid, just trying to make sense in the world, my brain was overactive. It was constantly looking for ways to protect me. And so what we know from neuroscience is that the neurons that fire together wire together. And so when you have experiences where you don't feel safe again and again, your brain tries to protect you, and it creates these pathways to protect you, to prevent that, to try to prevent that from happening again. And so at an early age, I was dealing with anxiety. I would feel it in my body, racing heart, a mind that couldn't really think clearly. I was clouded. The fight or flight system in my brain was going off. It was hard to think clearly. And that's because the limbic system in my brain was firing off. And what we know from neuroscience is that when that happens so often, we can't think that clearly because our prefrontal cortex, the higher reasoning and judgment portion of the brain at the top front of the brain, that's why I keep pointing there, starts to shut down a little bit. And so we're just reacting, trying to find safety. And that's what I experienced growing up. And I didn't know how to stop being anxious. I didn't know how to overcome it. And I'll talk about it in a few minutes, but I found real solutions, and God started to deliver me from anxiety. But what I want to share real quick are just 3 biblical principles that have been so life-changing for me in overcoming anxiety. And I truly believe if you apply these to your life, that you're going to find so much hope, so much freedom, so much healing, so much relief. Listen, I know what it is like to deal with just this overwhelming sense of anxiety that feels like it never goes away. It's like you can't get your mind to calm down. You can't get your body to calm down. You wonder, when will life not be like this? Will life ever get better? Listen, it can get better. First thing I want to share is that one of the reasons I think so many people are dealing with this is that our primary spiritual battles in life take place in our minds. Our primary spiritual battles in life take place in our minds. And specifically, this is a battle of believing truth over lies. You know, if you think about, a lot of us can be thinking at times, or have experienced this at times, blaming certain things on the enemy or a spiritual battle, like getting a flat tire, and that may be the case, or kind of minor inconveniences, or, you know, like you really want Chick-fil-A, but you realize it's Sunday, and it's closed, and you just blame the enemy for that. And we think of these minor inconveniences, but I think there's such a greater deception that the enemy is pulling over all of us, or so many of us. And it's getting us to believe these lies that sound so true. And over 580 times, the Bible mentions the words mind, think, believe, and then variations of those. And then that's just in one translation, the ESV translation. But throughout all those times, there's this huge emphasis on what we're supposed to put our mind towards, what we're supposed to put our mental energy towards. We're told to set our minds on things above in Colossians 3:2. We're told to think about things that are true, noble, right, pure, admirable, lovely in Philippians 4:8. And we're told to be transformed by the renewing of our mind in Romans 12:2. And we see this spiritual battle of the mind that we're up against in 2 Corinthians 10:3-5. It says, "For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ." We're in this spiritual battle in our thoughts, in our minds, and it's this battle of demolishing mental strongholds. And so many of us have these mental strongholds. We believe lies that sound so true. The enemy's going to use whatever he can to get us to believe lies and to attack us, to attack our minds specifically. And mental ill health, you know, is a result of living in a fallen world, in a broken world. And God cares about restoring that because he is in the process of restoring all things. Jesus defeated Satan, sin, and death, and he's restoring all things. And so God desires to restore our mental health. He cares so much about our mental health. He cares about our mental health because our minds are the primary battleground where the war for restoration takes place. So it's no wonder that so many people are struggling with their mental health, because this is where our primary spiritual battle takes place, in our minds. Second thing I want to share is that as part of mental health, anxiety is such a huge issue. I shared some stats earlier that 55% of young people say that they feel moderately or extremely anxious. But one of the things we got to realize is that anxiety is not random. It's not random. It's signaling something to us. If you think about the lights on the dashboard of your car, if the check engine light comes on, it's telling you to check the engine. There's something going on deeper with the vehicle. The same thing is true with anxiety. It's alerting us. It's telling us that we feel like something is threatening our well-being. Something is threatening our safety. And normally that has to do with the past experiences where we didn't feel safe, where we felt rejected, criticized, were embarrassed. And our brain is trying to protect us in the present from that happening again. It's on alert. We see this in the Bible. 1 Samuel 21-24. David was anxious. He was running from King Saul, who was trying to take his life, and he was so riddled with anxiety. He was living in caves. I mean, he was just experiencing such great pain because somebody's trying to take his life that he's riddled with anxiety. It makes sense. 1 Peter 5:7 says to cast all our anxieties on God because he cares for us. But we have to know what our anxiety actually is, what it's actually about, to be able to take that to God and ask him to free us. And then Proverbs 4:23. I love this verse. It says, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. We were created to have a heart that is whole, where our needs are met, where we feel safe, where we feel loved, where we feel accepted, affirmed, where we know that we matter. And what happens is, as we go throughout life, we experience pain, bullying, rejection, trauma, abuse. We live in a fallen world, and things wound our heart. And what comes out of that is everything. Everything flows out from our heart when it is wounded. And so, as I shared a little bit earlier, for me growing up, not feeling safe, experiencing abuse, what was flowing out of my heart was anxiety, kind of this radar of always wondering or always being on alert, trying to protect myself. And my fight or flight system always going off, always wondering, always worrying, feeling just this heightened sense of adrenaline, of increased heart rate, of worrying, and sometimes not consciously, but when it was conscious, of worrying, when's the next time I'm going to be rejected or hurt? And so many of us have these negative or painful experiences, and we start to respond to those things. And we saw that big time in 2020, when the numbers of American adults dealing with anxiety and depression went from 11% up to 41%. People were responding to, I'm a little sick, so pardon that. The number of people in 2020 just responding to the pain, the fear, the things going on in the world, the loss of life. And people were dealing with anxiety as a result of it, fearing for their lives, fearing for their family members, fearing that they would get sick. And many people started believing, I'm not safe. And then anxiety was developed as a way to try to protect themselves, to try and be on guard, to try and find a solution. Because when you're constantly anxious and it's getting your attention, you want it to go away. And the only way you can get it to go away is if you solve it. And so our brains are firing off, and we're trying to find a solution, trying to solve it, trying to feel some kind of safety. And a lot of people were dealing with that in 2020. But a lot of people today are just dealing with that growing up in this world, where there's pain, where there's hurt, where there's loss. And what happens is anxiety is always caused, or what happens with anxiety always in the moment is there's two sides of the coin. There's this conscious or subconscious automatic negative thought, automatic fearful thought, intrusive thought, and then there's this image that goes with it. And so consciously, someone might have a fearful thought about being unalived tomorrow, or maybe getting into an accident and getting really harmed. And often with that, just in an instant, there's this image that comes into their mind of that happening, and it can spike anxiety. Subconsciously, many of us have these deeply held beliefs. Going back to what I said earlier, we believe lies and we think they're true. And so many people believe this lie that out of self-protection, that they're going to be rejected, that people aren't going to be there for them, that they're not good enough. And then anxiety is a way to try and protect themselves from that happening again. Anxiety is this warning signal alerting us that, one of these thoughts, one of these beliefs is being triggered. And so it takes practice to figure out what's going on with anxiety, what's coming up, what lie am I believing that is being triggered. But as I experienced in my life, once I was able to start naming what it was, I was able to find freedom, because I was able to challenge the lie and start believing what was true. So when we have these negative or painful experiences, we believe lies, and then we start to feel anxious. We have these anxious thoughts and reactions. We struggle to do what Philippians 4:8 says. It says to think about things that are true, that are right, that are noble, that are pure. And so anxiety is in response to not thinking about things that are true. We're believing lies. We're believing that we will be rejected, that we will be harmed. So many of the things we get anxious about or worry about never actually happen. A lot of times we're dealing with anticipatory anxiety. That's the anxiety that happens before the thing you fear. And a lot of times what happens, if you can just tell yourself this, okay, I'm dealing with anticipatory anxiety. I'm having a high level of anxiety, but what you'll notice is when you actually face the thing that you're fearing, it's a lot lower. It's not nearly as bad as you thought. So if you can remind yourself that anxiety is like this wave, I just got to surf it. And once I actually face that thing I'm fearing, as I remember from the past, it wasn't as bad as I thought. Last thing I want to share is that once we start to really understand how our brain works and what anxiety is about, we can start to renew our minds. And so we have billions of neurons or nerve cells in our brain, and they're constantly firing off. And as with anxiety, the more we get anxious, we have the same thoughts over and over again, we create these fixed neurological pathways, kind of like muscle memory in our brain. And it becomes easier and easier to get anxious. Practice a practical example. A couple of years ago, I was just starting to get really anxious every time I would drive on the highway. And just over and over again, I'd be driving on the highway, I'd have these thoughts or these images in my mind, or come into my mind of, getting into a car crash or a car cutting over. And I started to get really, really anxious, and it developed this pattern over and over again every time I got on the highway. And so it had created these fixed neurological pathways. But what I started to do was instead, every time I got on the highway, I would quote Psalm 9:9 to myself. The Lord is a refuge to the oppressed. He's a stronghold in times of trouble. And I would imagine this bubble around me of God keeping me safe. And I would just keep going over that in my mind. And what it actually did was over time it created new neurological pathways, and I stopped dealing with anxiety on the highway when I was driving. See, our brain is changeable. It's malleable. And it can happen so quick. We just got to know what our anxiety is about and then what the truth is and what to visualize to have our brain rewire. We see this in Romans 12:2. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. The pattern of this world is fear, anxiety, so many other things, but so many people are dealing with fear, and that is not of God. That's a pattern of this world. But we can be transformed by the renewing of our mind, by challenging those thoughts, by calming our mind and our body, by telling ourselves what is true. In recent decades, neuroscientists discovered something called neuroplasticity, which is your brain's ability to change, to reorganize itself. And our brains are not fixed. We can overcome anxiety. We can start to have peace. We can overcome those old patterns in our minds. And God is able to do that as we take steps to identify what makes us anxious and identify the truth and visualize God being with us, comforting us. The more believable story. Your brain can change. So here are 3 simple steps to renew your mind through truths we find in neuroscience, but also in the Bible, that I believe will really help. The first one is to identify the what. What brings up anxiety for you? You know, you don't have to list out every single thing, but think about what's the biggest thing in my life that is constantly bringing anxiety up for me. Is it rejection? Is it the fear of rejection? Is it feeling unsafe? Is it sickness or some kind of medical type of anxiety that you're dealing with? Is it you're afraid of having panic attacks? Is it something else? Identify what it is. Remember that our anxiety is not random. There's a cause to it. 1 Peter 5:7, cast all your anxiety on him. But again, we have to know what our anxiety is about in order to even do that. Second is to identify the why. Why is this so significant to me? Why is this so significant to my life, to my story? What has happened in the past that has led me to fear this so much? Because again, our brains latch on to things that we go through in life, things that cause us harm, things that cause us pain. And God wired our brains in our fight or flight system to try to protect us. And so we develop ways of responding, of being anxious to try to not let those things happen again. Maybe you had negative experiences in the past hurt, harm that was done to you, abuse. Maybe you started to believe lies that you would be rejected. Anything that looks like that past negative experience in the present brings up anxiety for you. Perhaps you're trying to protect yourself, or your brain is trying to protect you at all costs, even if you don't need to be protected. That's what happens with anxiety. Our brains essentially get hijacked. And even when we are safe in the present, in the future, anything that looks like those past experiences of harm can trigger the anxiety for us. And the third step is to take every thought captive. 2 Corinthians 10:5 says to take every thought captive. It's been estimated that we have over 10,000 thoughts a day. We have good thoughts, we have bad thoughts, we have intrusive thoughts, and we're to be good stewards of our mind. Remember that we're in the spiritual battle in our minds. We need to catch the lie, the automatic negative thought, the automatic fearful thought, and question it and challenge it and tell ourselves what the truth is. Redirect our thoughts to the truth. If you're dealing with anxiety, this is something that people have been dealing with for so long. Jesus talks about it. He said, do not be anxious about today. Do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. There in Matthew 6, he also talks about how so many people worry about their daily needs. And what we learn about that is anxiety is this attempt to try to protect yourself from from things that threaten your well-being, things you see as a threat to your life, whether that's socially, relationally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally. Anxiety is an attempt to protect ourselves, to try to find safety. And so by figuring out, by questioning what our anxiety is about and what lies we're believing and what we actually need, and challenging that anxiety with the truth, we can rewire the pathways in our brain of anxiety and find freedom. And that's what God has continued to do in my life. If I think about growing up and the rejection I experienced so often, I used to fear conflict so much, and as an adult, and get really anxious. If somebody said, hey, we need to talk, how many of us are like riddled with anxiety? That's really just this symptom of this unresolved pain from our past coming up in the present. But so often that doesn't happen anymore for me. I don't fear that rejection like I used to. My brain isn't always on high alert. My body isn't hyper vigilant like it used to be. I've learned to be at peace, knowing that God is with me, that He protects me, knowing that I'm valuable to Him, knowing that there's a difference between who I am and my thoughts, intrusive thoughts, fearful thoughts. I don't have to believe everything that I think. I can question those. I can tell myself the truth. I can redirect my thoughts. And I am probably 90% less anxious, or dealing with anxiety 90% less than I was about 5 years ago, as God has continued to rewire my brain. And so I want to encourage you to join our online private community through Discord. Go to resolutionmovement.org/join, because we're going to be going through the Overcoming Anxiety YouVersion Bible plan that I wrote, where I share a lot of these steps. We're going to go through it as a community. There's 500 people in this community, and I want you to be a part of it. I want you to find the support and help you need. As I mentioned earlier, in the community, there's links to counseling. There's links to other resources, other struggles that you might be dealing with: shame, trauma, pornography, lust. There's channels for prayer where you can share your prayer requests, and people will pray for you and respond. So resolutionmovement.org/join. I want to invite you to be part of that community.